What's going on, guys? Welcome to something a little bit different. This is going to be a series review of the series Shogun, and with me, as always, I have BlueSpade.
Yeah. So it's pretty interesting. Like Shogun is of course based off of a 1975 novel by James Clavell. Um, the thing about this story is it's kind of it's a fictional representation of real life history. It contains characters from real life events, but of course uh, fictionalized versions of certain characters. One being John Blackthorne, who's the main character of the story, who's based off of a real life you know, English sailor named what was it, William Adams. Then of course we have other characters uh, what was it, Yoshi Toranaga, who's based off the real life samurai shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu. Um, so Shogun is it's only a one season miniseries, so there's not going to be a second season for good reason because it's only based off of one book. But overall, I did how faithful it was to the book itself, and like how good the production values is as well as the acting as well.
Yeah, so I started watching the show like when it was still coming out because I mean it just recently ended, but a lot of people were hyping it up and talking about how it's well, a lot of people, of course, were comparing it to Game of Thrones, mainly, I guess, because of all the like the political machinations in the show and how a lot it's not afraid to kill off characters, and of course a lot of that I think is due to it just being a limited series and it's just one season. But I I didn't so much see it that way. I just I kind of see it more so as just its own thing. I don't really like how people, of course, they just compare it to shows like that because I mean I feel like it gives people a certain expectation where that's not really what the series is trying to be. But it did kind of make me a little bit kind of interesting checking it out, and also because of the setting. I'm a pretty big sucker for the feudal Japan setting. As we know, the game Neo is kind of like very I guess loosely based off of uh what John the real life character or the real life person who was based off of John Blackthorne. It's kind of loosely based off of that, or at least his character in that game. Um, and yeah, but I mean, the show it kind of what really like hooked me about the show not wasn't so much of the what was going on in terms of the politics of it and everything, but it was more so just the characters. Um, like John Blackthorne specifically, like his relationship with the character of Mariko and how it kind of develops over the core of the series. How they just start off with this somewhat not antagonistic relationship, but just John Blackthorne, of course, he doesn't want to be there. He's trying to get back to his home country because his ship crash lands in Japan and he's taken prisoner. And he's trying to basically negotiate to try to find a way to get his ship rebuilt and get back to his home country of England. But of course, he ends up caught in the middle of this conflict between Toranaga and
And,
what was the other
Ishido.
Ishido, yeah. And there, what's going on between them. He gets caught up in that, and he develops not only a relationship with, or friendship with Mariko, but also with somewhat of a friendship with Toranaga, where Toranaga starts to promise him things, and he becomes sort of like, he's basically, of course, as they've never really seen, I guess like an Englishman in Japan before. There are other characters who have shown up that are not originally from Japan because at that point, I guess in history, Japan was, a fairly unknown place. Like not a lot of people knew about Japan, aside from I guess like as we see in the series, the Portuguese, who had kind of like settled there and kind of implemented the Catholicism and kind of tried to spread Catholicism there. As we see Mariko as like I guess converted to Catholicism as she had become friends with one of the Portuguese priests. But John Blackthorne, of course, because when he first gets there, he's confused as a Portuguese, but he has to convince them he's not from Portugal, that he's from a place called England, and nobody really knows what England is.
Yeah.
Um,
There are times,
uh,
he did face some challenges at first because, not only him, but he also had a crew of different merchants that were selling alongside with them, that were sailing at like in a completely different trade route in comparison to where the Portuguese were at. Eventually,
yeah.
they do
Um,
arrive in Japan, but of course, Blackthorn and his crew, as well as his ship, gets apprehended by what was it? By one of the lords that who spotted this ship, named Yabushige.
mm,
Yabushige, of course, tries to figure out who Blackthorn is, but of course, one of his Portuguese translators deliberately mistranslates what Blackthorn is trying to relate to Yabushige. But of course, he eventually gets taken prisoner, and of course, I think one or two of his crewmates gets killed in gruesome ways. Like one of them gets boiled alive in hot water.
yeah, and then of course, as we see later in the series, um his crew does, like, the rest of his crew, they do survive, but they don't really go out of their way, I guess, to really like go and look for John. A lot of them just spend their time just getting drunk, and kind of taking advantage of the of just like, I get of the privileges they were given or whatever. So I mean, because at one point John Blackthorne does, like, after he's given a home and all this other stuff by Torinaga, he does eventually go and try to find the rest of his crew, but he just finds them basically just being drunk and disorderly, and he eventually, like, I think that might have been somewhat of a turning point for his character, because as up until that point he'd really been like desperate to try to return home, but I feel like having seen that, he just kind of he I think some of his resolve to go back to his home country and go back with the rest of his crew kind of goes away, because he sees basically like what they are and now, and like what he is now, I guess. And he just, I guess, he figures he doesn't want to be like a part of that anymore,
Yeah,
and he just walks away. He doesn't really try to he doesn't really try to go back to them. He just decides to leave them.
yeah. And there's another thing about like Blackthorn, that he does mention to Mariko that he does have a family in England, like a wife and child. But of course, it never gets brought back up again, like even by the last episode.
Yeah, yeah. When we were talking about this off the recording, I was mentioning how it was weird how we never really got to see his family. It made me wonder if he really did even have a family back in England, because we never really get to see them up until at least like near the very end of the series, where we don't necessarily like see. I don't really know if this counts, because like we see him like having a dream, where he sees like what would, I guess, because it's a dream of the future where he's very old and he's like just, it seems like he's about to die, like he's just very old at that point. And we see, I guess, his grandchildren asking him about a katana he has. And But it's weird, because that, I guess, is more so just a potential of something that could have happened had he returned home, because that's not really what ends up happening at the end of the series. So it is kind of weird, because we never really get to see his wife and children, because he says he has them, but we never see them. Which, it's which made me like kind of question, like, there is, like I said, there was like a friendship he has with these other characters, but more specifically, like, there's definitely like a relationship, I would say, that develops between him and Mariko in the series. But and it was kind of weird, because as we know, Mariko in the series was married to this guy, but it was more so this guy called Buntaro, but it was more like an arranged marriage. And we kind of see her basically imply that she's not really in love with him, or she's not really like happy being with him or anything like that, but she feels like she has to be with him, because that's just how she was arranged to be with him.
Yeah,
And then John Blackthorne, like, he only like vaguely references his wife and kids, but doesn't really talk much about them.
yeah.
I think there may be like, not actually, no, he doesn't really talk about them. I think he kind of, I think he says he has a daughter at one point or something, but like I think there's only like one scene where he talks about
Yeah, yeah. It
talks
was
about his
just like
kids.
only in one small scene in one episode in which
Yeah.
Blackthorn discusses this to Mariko, but of course, like I said, it never gets brought up again for the remainder of the
Yeah.
series.
So I mean, I was kind of like actually wanting them to, kind of in a way be together, because I felt like they had pretty good chemistry together, and it does end up happening, but of course it like many other things in the series, it has a pretty tragic end because of what ends up happening to Mariko. But there's a lot of characters that end up dying in the series. I mean, and I guess in that sense it is somewhat similar to Game of Thrones, where like no character is really safe and anybody could really die at any point in the series.
Yeah.
And of course is something that ends up happening to Mariko, but fortunately it does have some like pretty some it has like her death basically results in the main conflict of the series, I guess, sort of being resolved in a way.
Yeah. There is another character that Blackthorn also has. I guess you could say it, somewhat say it's a friendship. It also involves like another woman named Fuji, who ends up serving
Yeah.
alongside Blackthorn. She's like a former wife of a samurai who ends up committing seppuku for trying to defend Toranaga, for like against like Ishido's like accusations against Toranaga. But of course, like he speaks out of turn, and then which results in not only for him committing seppuku, but also having his own son killed as well.
Mhm.
And
Um,
which of course leads to Fuji being left as a widow afterwards, and eventually like this leaves her like a little bit despondent, and of course like initially distrustful of Blackthorn. Uh, but of course, eventually, like throughout the course of the show, she eventually starts having some form of respect towards Blackthorn before eventually like confirming that she's sees Blackthorn as a friend even after she leaves his service.
Yeah, I feel like it was the same way with Blackthorn too, where in the beginning he didn't really understand or there well he didn't really understand the culture, and he didn't really have any kind of respect for some of them, and then like near the end of the series he's basically like kind of did a 180 in a way where now he does respect them, and he is like friendly towards them. Like it's kind of what happens with him also, like it happens with him and her, but it also happened with him and Mariko's husband Buntaro, where there was like there's definitely like a lot of animosity between them, mostly because Buntaro thinks that Blackthorn is trying to get with his wife. So there's a lot of conflict between them in the series, until like near the end of the series, where he's one of the people that helps Blackthorn like bring his ship up out of the water, and you can tell that they're like on good terms.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, I feel like it happens with a few different characters, with Blackthorn and some of the other characters in the series too, where they started off on they're kind of like didn't like each other, and then eventually, that they're actually like friends.
Yeah. Yeah. This is this is definitely a good amount of character development for Blackthorn. From once he first arrives in Japan, and eventually like he does eventually learn and respect Japanese culture over time, to the point where
Yeah.
he feels like he has a place there, at, after everything that has happened. So it more.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to mention too, like that's a big part of the series, is like I guess you would say the culture shock that John experiences, being in a different culture and not really understanding how they do things. Like when he first is given the house that house to live in by Toranaga, he's like, there's a few instances of it like where the Japanese don't understand why he would like have, I think was it like turkey, or he had some like meat that he hung
Like
out on.
he was given a pheasant as a gift from
Yeah,
Toranaga, but
yeah, and they didn't understand like why he would hang it out there or something, because it was like it started to smell, and that's not how they, I guess that's not how they would have, not how they do things. um and basically like it ends up resulting in like Blackthorn basically like his he gets really annoyed with them trying to, I guess, take the pheasant down. And there's kind of like a side character that Blackthorn kind of has a somewhat of a relationship with, or like friendship with, this old man that I guess tends to, I think it tends to his garden or something. That he apparently, the old man off screen had like touched the bird, and Blackthorn, like, he wasn't being, I don't think he was being 100 like literal about it, but he said like if anybody touches the bird, that they would be killed or something like that. As that they should stay away from the pheasant. And he touched the pheasant, and they took his words like literally, and ended up killing the man. So Blackthorn like feels very like of course he's like kind of shocked by this because he didn't expect them to actually do that. And he, feels kind of guilty about it. I kind of wish that's one thing I guess I'll say about the series. I kind of wish they would maybe focus a little bit more on him feeling guilt over kind of inadvertently killing the man. But of course he didn't know that would have ended up happening.
Yeah.
But,
Because yeah, because they because the reason for this is because Toranaga has placed him in much high regard over the course of the series. Like not only that, because for Toranaga, like he was
well, we should mention too, like Toranaga gives after they become friends, Toranaga gives him the position of being the like the I guess the commander of the cannon regiment or something, because he was trying to like show what kind of skill he could bring to help Toranaga in his fight. Because he's a sailor, but like they were trying to like figure out what he could, I guess, what he could do for Toranaga. And I guess like
yeah
he displayed that he was proficient in like trying to or in like cannon, was it like cannon techniques or maneuver, like he says that he doesn't really know much because he's just a sailor, but I guess he does bring knowledge of from England in terms of like military knowledge of that over to Japan.
yeah. I think what was it? Toranaga named he called Blackthorn like or he's given Blackthorn the title of Hatamoto, which was
Yeah, Hanamoto.
which of course is like according to Japanese history, it's like a high-ranking samurai position in direct service of the shogunate at the time. So it was because like he places Blackthorn in a much higher position. Considering that like he is a foreigner of a different land. I mean, he's still like Toranaga puts a lot of trust towards Blackthorn.
Yeah. And I mean there are a lot of instances where their relationship is pretty strained too, just because of Blackthorn is basically, he's kind of being strung along in a sense by Toranaga, where Toranaga is making him these promises, and Blackthorn is like, okay, I've done all this for you. Like, when am I going to be able to get my ship back, and when am I going to get to see my crew, and when am I going to go back home? And there's like a few instances throughout the series where he really like he really like confronts Toranaga about that, and as a result, like their relationship just kind of becomes like this kind of, in a way, this sort of back and forth where like he Toranaga will promise him that, and then John Blackthorn will go along with it for a while until he's kind of fed up, and confronts him about it.
Yeah.
Um,
In terms of Toranaga himself, like he's also an interesting character. I mean, well, for Toranaga, he's based off of the real life samurai shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu. So Toranaga, he has this like political rivalry with one of the other council members named Ishido, who of course like Ishido accuses like Toranaga of treason, and he asks like the other council members to vote to impeach him, and of course and have him executed soon afterwards. So Toranaga at the beginning of the show, like he was being held hostage in Osaka until Blackthorn ends up helping him escape from there.
yeah. Yeah, so I mean, they do kind of like help each other out a lot throughout the series. But it was like I said, that was like the main thing I liked about the show was this, just seeing I thought most of the characters were pretty well done, and I the main appeal to me was like I really liked Mariko's character, and I really liked Blackthorn. And I mean, I thought the politics of it were interesting, but it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't the main appeal of the show, even though it was interesting seeing how, like, I mean, I'm sure it's not 100% accurate, of course, to how things happened in history, but it was like interesting seeing that, how even though it's loosely based on it, seeing, the first, I guess, Englishman to arrive in Japan, and how, he he interacts with their people and their culture.
Yeah. In terms of like for Mariko, like you mentioned like that they reveal a lot of backstory of like what happened to her and how she eventually uh she what was it she converted to Catholicism. There were of course other instances in where like she interacts with another character. I think I'm trying
The
to
priest.
not only just the priest, but I think what was it Lady Ochiba, who's also who
Oh
she's
yeah.
also friends with, which of course Ishido is trying to get favor of in order to I guess gain favor of like the Taiko's heir at the time, so he can uh, I guess consolidate power within the council itself. But, of course, there is history between Lady Ochiba and Mariko that they are good friends together once, and Ochiba, has some animosity towards Toranaga for taking Mariko away from her. And of course, eventually it gets to the point where once Mariko ends up getting killed thanks to Ishido sending like ninjas against her. This convinces Ochiba to, of course, withdraw her support from Ishido ahead of the Battle of Sekigahara.
Yeah, because even though their relationship had become, they'd become distant from each other. Obviously, it was obvious she still cared for her, and I think she cared enough to, after she had died, to kind of like switch her allegiances.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, another thing I was interested in too was that it kind of like there were some characters I wasn't expecting them to sort of go the direction they went in the series. Like the Portuguese priest, for instance. I thought that he was going to be like someone who would be like almost like a villain character for John, who he would go up against at some point, but that it surprisingly didn't end up happening. I mean, of course, as we know, Marco's death had a pretty big effect on everything near the end of the series. So like he said at one point, like when he was escorting John out or escorting John away, that he would have ended up John would have ended up being, he would have ended up having I guess John killed, but because of Marco's sacrifice that his life was spared. Um, and like the two of them kind of even though they were like rivals and they John of course is was kind of out to get the Portuguese at the beginning of the series. They kind of come to somewhat of an understanding as well. So I was kind of surprised by that. I was not like there were some things like that where I didn't expect it to go that direction by the end of the series.
yeah. So yeah, so by the end of the episode, once Blackthorn returns back to Izu, oh no, like was it Izu? I keep forgetting the place. So,
I'm not exactly sure,
yeah, so
but
like
it was the fishing village I think that
yeah,
he
so
arrived in.
he finds that his ship the Erasmus ends up getting burned down, and he was told that Christians snuck in like in the middle of the night, ended up burning his ship, and Blackthorn assumes that this was because of Mariko negotiating with the Catholics or the Christians to spare his life, which to burn his ship down as well. So this leads into a scene in which like much of the village is being punished over the fact that his ship got burned down, and so Blackthorn confronts Toranaga about this, um, trying to convince him not to punish the village over the burning of his ship, and eventually he like it gets to the point where he admits to Toranaga that he's been using him the entire time in order to take advantage of him. Um,
Well, and he also, of course, threatens to commit seppuku to spare the lives of the villagers.
yeah,
Um, which is interesting too because and it shows how far his character has come as well. Because at the beginning of the series, he scoffed at the idea of the Japanese committing seppuku over their honor, or or just to basically like if they committed some grave offense, or for whatever reason you commit seppuku, he didn't agree with it, but did you see it he uses it at the end to try to to basically just try to convince Toranaga to stop. Um, but of course, Toranaga stops him like at the last second, right before he kills himself, which happened to again also at another point too, where Mariko like because I thought she was going to die before she actually died, where she was about to commit seppuku for similar reasons, but is also stopped like at the last second too, before she does it.
Yeah. So soon after Toranaga stops Blackthorn from committing seppuku, he asks Blackthorn to rebuild his ship and build him a fleet soon afterwards. Then, of course, by the next scene, we see one last conversation between Toranaga and Yabushige. Of course, Yabushige is an interesting character throughout the entire show. That he tries to play both sides of the entire conflict by trying to not only gain favor of Toranaga but of also Ishido as well.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and I mean he of course like he kind of owns up to how he kind of he sees himself as just not being a good person and all that right before he kills himself, and uh he asks like Toranaga like what his if his plan like is to become the Shogun or something like that, and Toranaga like tells him before he dies like I can't tell you the future.
Like, why
So
tell a dead man the future?
why tell a dead man the future?
Yeah. So Toranaga, of course, like admits to Yabushige that he was the one who ended up burning down Blackthorn's ship in the first place, mainly as a test for Blackthorn. Which of course, like he's convinced that uh, Blackthorn's intentions are genuine soon afterwards. Um, and of course, Toranaga like reveals to Yabushige his true plan with which is his Operation Crimson Sky, which like he
Yeah.
initially like
uh,
he wanted to.
I would say too, like yeah, like so we did hear about Crimson Sky earlier in the series, and we were kind of led to believe that Crimson Sky was going to be some kind of like some operation where Toranaga would basically like storm the castle and sacrifice all of the last of his men just to try to just to try to take it back. So it would basically in a way be like almost like a suicide mission,
Yeah.
but of course that's not what it ended up actually being.
Yeah, so a lot of things did happen, which kind of did upend Toranaga's plan on several occasions. Like one is there was the earthquake, which kind of decimated not only his army but most of his village as well. And then there's also the death of his son, which literally just came out of nowhere, and like and of course like his brother also ended up joining up with Ishido soon afterwards. So this left like Toranaga in a really bad spot until like to the point where Mariko ended up sacrificing herself.
Yeah. Um. But yeah, so the end of the series too, I guess we should talk a little bit about as well. Like so, we get that scene between Toranaga and Yabushige, and then we of course see Blackthorn eventually eventually bring his ship back, with the help of
No,
everybody
yeah,
else,
but
pull his ship
before
back up.
this, like we see like Yabushige committing seppuku
Oh
soon
yeah,
before this.
yeah. So well, the other thing too. Well, speaking of seppuku, like I didn't really know about like before I started watching the series, like the whole like somebody would cut your head off after you committed seppuku. Like I was always thought it was just like that they cut their guts out and that was it. I didn't know about like the beheading part of it. So I thought that was interesting. Yeah, like it's because that happens like a few different times, like in the series, where somebody would commit seppuku and then they would be beheaded, which they call like somebody would come to second you.
Yeah. So but yeah, soon after this, so Blackthorn by the end of the episode has the entire village help him pull his ship out from the water. It's like, and of course Buntaro uh come comes in to help him out, and we see like a Blackthorn and Buntaro, like I guess you know I guess men their uh uh I wouldn't say friendship or of some sorts, but And
Well, we'll just like come to an understanding in a way, I
yeah,
guess, like where they're not really like rivals anymore. They're not like trying to kill each other.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah. So
and then of course like Blackthorn and Toranaga just like like look at each other, and you know Blackthorn kind of smiles, and Toranaga just looks off into the distance, and that's kind of how it ends, which is like my main criticism of that is that I just kind of wish that we would have seen more, like of sort of seen more of the outcome of what happened after that. See just to see how far like what happened with Blackthorn and some of the other characters maybe like further into the future, just to give it a little bit more closure. We do see like what would eventually happen with the battle, where the battle wouldn't really take place, and that Toranaga would just kind of in a way win by default, without having to kill anybody killed. Um, because if there was a battle, then Toranaga would probably lose in a real battle because he was most likely outnumbered. Um, so yeah, that never really happened, and he ended up winning and taking, I guess taking back power. Um, but yeah, I would have liked to have seen like what happened with some of those characters. Um, but because as it is, a lot of it's kind of left up to interpretation, and I guess just what we know from history. Um, but I would have actually liked to have seen it,
yeah,
just to actually like just considering this is a limited series and it's just the only season we have. Would have liked to have seen that, but I guess in a way it's not a bad ending, even though a lot of that is just kind of left up to our imagination in a way
yeah.
to kind of guess as to what might have
I
happened.
mean, we did get some amount of closure for Blackthorn's storyline. Um,
Yeah,
as
I mean, we know that of course, like he never really went back to England, which honestly, in a way I'm kind of happy that ended up happening with his character, because it seemed like I didn't really like what I saw in the I guess the possible future he would have had, I guess, but that's I guess just showing the outcome of had he never really let Mariko go, because as in the dream sequence he has, he's still holding on to the cross that she had. Um, so I mean I feel like I'm glad to know that he probably ended up living a life in Japan where he was happy there, and had just had kids. But at the same time, it is just kind of a weird thing about the series that we never really get to find out if Blackthorn really did actually have a family back in England, because it would kind of if that's the case, then he did kind of just, if you think about it, he did just abandon his family,
yeah,
just to stay in Japan.
I mean,
um,
there's a lot. I mean, yeah, people would need to look into William Adams like a history post storyline after this, because what happens after
mhm.
this is is William Adams does eventually work alongside Tokugawa. He becomes his personal his advisor, translator, and of course, like he builds the fleet like he promised, as well as like
Yeah.
helping out with like different trade routes and whatnot to help like I guess Japan economically as well. And he eventually Adams eventually does end up marrying another person to have like several a couple other kids later. As for like William Adams like wife and child, he does end up providing for them with with the amount of money he gained during his time in Japan. So he didn't really truly.
Oh, so he does actually like return to
No,
England
no,
at
no.
some point,
He doesn't return
or
to England.
oh,
He gets like whatever funding he obtains while in Japan, and then he ships like all a portion of his fortunes to his family in England.
hmm. Yeah. But yeah, I overall I thought it was a really good series, one of the best ones I've seen in recent memory. And I mean it does suck that it's just one season, but I mean it makes sense why it is. Maybe at some point we could have some of the other novels that uh, I think Clavel that he wrote, maybe adapted in a similar way. Um, but I thought this is, yeah, really good series. I mean, if I would say if the other novels that he's written are of the same quality or as good as this, then maybe just have some of those adapted too, and like I said, in a similar way. but yeah, I really, it was a great show. And I don't, I think in a way it's good that we have a show that doesn't really, I guess, like overstay its welcome. It doesn't go on for any longer than it needs to. It has a definitive beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah.
And I like that about it too. That, and because of that too, like characters, you don't know who's gonna live and who's gonna die. As opposed with like a long running series that's afraid to kill off characters. So yeah, I thought that was, that was refreshing about it, and it had really good characters too. So it was characters you actually didn't want to see get killed or anything bad happen to them. So yeah, I mean, yeah, it's generally just very well written. There's like it had a lot going for it. I thought there wasn't a lot of action, but when it did happen, it was really good. And of course I think it's like TVMA, so it didn't hold back. It showed everything.
Yeah,
Um,
I definitely
yeah.
like how faithful it was to the Japanese culture, on how well, like, the entire community worked up to, like, back in the day, and how politics were handled, as well. Um, so
Mhm.
yeah, but overall, like, the biggest highlight is, the overall character development, with not only just Blackthorn, but all the other characters, on how, you know and, pretty much in, like, how things played out for Toranaga as well.
Another thing I should point out too is I liked how dedicated it was to being authentic to the Japanese culture, where a lot of people, Blackthorn had to learn how to speak Japanese, like, and that was another thing in the show too. If he had no familiarity with the Japanese language when we first got there, and he always needed a translator. But we saw throughout the course of the series he does end up learning the language, to where at the end of the series he's able to form sentences. I mean, he still just knows kind of basic things, but he's able to actually hold somewhat of a conversation with the other characters. Um, and I also like that, throughout most of the series, you'll have most characters speaking in Japanese. And I thought it was funny because a lot of people, of course, were complaining about that because they're like, "Oh, I don't want to read subtitles." But I don't want a series where you have Japanese characters just all speaking English. It wouldn't make any sense, if you're trying to accurately portray how the culture is. So you should just have, of course, everybody's speaking Japanese, and Blackthorn just has to over time learn how to actually speak the language. Um, and you did at least have some characters that could speak fluent English, like Mariko, for instance. Um, who had to be his translator.
Yeah,
Um,
and
but
then,
yeah, that was another thing I really liked about the series.
yeah, and of course there are, like, the other, like, Portuguese characters as well, but we really don't get to see a lot of those characters, other than, like, Blackthorn and many of the Japanese characters as well. But yeah,
Mm.
I did like, that. I guess you could say Blackthorn does represent, like, the actual viewer itself, trying to, like, being thrust into a world that that they're not familiar with, to eventually, like, learning and eventually starting to respect its culture.
Yeah, yeah. I mean Blackthorn goes through a pretty, he definitely goes through a pretty good character arc throughout the series. I could say the same for a lot of the other characters too. Um, but yeah, I really enjoyed it. But I guess if I already give it a rating, yeah, I definitely like would say it's a 9 out of 10.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I don't really have much else to say about it though. It was definitely a great series, and I hope that someday maybe they'll adapt some of Clavel's other novels, if they're as good as Shogun is. But Shogun was, yeah, it was really good. But yeah, I don't know if you have anything else to say about the
Yeah,
series.
I would definitely, rate it as high as, you did, but there are at least a couple things that I really wish that it could have done, like, I guess, like, put out, like, some kind of post episode monologue of what happened to Blackthorn, instead of, like, having it to leave it
Yeah,
to an interpretation. And then there was, the book also had, like, a couple other epilogue. Um, I wouldn't say scenes, but it revealed, like, what happened to certain characters. Like, after the Battle of Sekigahara, Toranaga ended up capturing Ishido, and that ends up burying him up to his neck, and then he dies 3 days later. But it's I'm not sure why they didn't reveal that, or at least explain that. But yeah, it's just like, I did like, how.
I mean, I guess at least it was enough to see that he lost and that Toranaga eventually got to take his power back.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, overall, yeah, I did enjoy this series, and I think it is better that there's not going to be a second season to this because it would really, I don't know, I wouldn't know how it would feel if if whoever's making this were to somehow decide to let's make a second season and show what happened to life after this. But I don't think there's any significant story to explain for Blackthorn in particular, who's based off of William Adams.
Yeah, yeah. It just feels like whenever things like this get really popular, it's like it almost feels like that the creators almost feel like they're obligated to make a follow up when they really don't have to. So I hope that's not really the route they go because like you said, there's not really much else of a story, any other story to tell after this, except if they were going to adapt his other novels.
Mhm.
Which is the only route I would go if considering how popular Shogun is. Maybe take a chance with his other novels and try adapting those. Um, but yeah, guys. So that all being said, until next time, we will see you all later.